Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. This is a place where masculine identifying people come together in community to disrupt outdated models of masculinity and together construct new models for our way forward as men. As a special note, while this conversation is between men, this podcast values all beings and seeks to create positive impacts for all. I'm your host, Travis Stock. I am a master life coach, an equus coach, which means I often partner with horses when supporting clients, and I'm a teacher. In my coaching work, I am passionate about the balance of masculine and feminine energies in each of us, regardless of gender. I seek to help others nurture a relationship with both types of energy, which often leads to a greater sense of wholeness. And yet what I found in my work with men is that many of us have been taught messages about what it means to be a man by first teaching us to avoid anything that is associated with the feminine. That avoidance leads to few experiences of intimacy, emotions outside of anger, vulnerability, or even a sense of belonging. Striving to comply with these models of masculinity has many of us feeling isolated, ashamed, unworthy, afraid, angry, and depressed. That's why I started this podcast, to bring men together who are ready for something new, something more whole. One of the major identities many men will hold is being a father. And with that identity comes new responsibilities, both directly with the child and the consistent internal work it takes to show up well in that role. Some men will follow what they already know, basing their fathering on the experiences they had with their own father. Others will recognize that there are things from their childhood that they don't want to repeat in their parenting. Where do men go when they want to be more conscious about how they show up with their children? Well, my next guest has something to offer to that conversation. Ed Center is a parenting educator and coach who founded VillageWell, a parenting platform and community hub that provides education and guidance on culturally grounded, positive parenting skills. Through VillageWell, Ed teaches parents and caregivers how to end intergenerational trauma and decolonize parenting by nurturing the parent-child relationship and being intentional about the ancestral wisdom utilized to raise kids in today's world. He primarily identifies as a husband, as a father, and as an entrepreneur. Even though I don't have children of my own at this stage, I do find myself super excited to learn from this man's journey of fatherhood. So let's welcome him into the New Masculine. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
We're recording this during Pride Month, so happy Pride Month.
Happy Pride!
Yes, we both just had great Pride weekends in our respective cities in San Francisco and Seattle. People will be listening to this and it will no longer be Pride Month, but people get to celebrate Pride all the time. So happy Pride. Yeah. So is there anything that I didn't mention in that intro about you that feels important for people to know about you before we get kind of jumping into this conversation?
I think that was a very good summary. Thank you. I think the other thing I'll want to add is that in starting my work around conscious parenting, positive parenting, parenting support, I felt it was really important to elevate and center the experiences of people of color. So I'm half Filipino, half Caucasian from Hawaii. And when I started my parenting journey, it felt very monocultural, culturally dominated, meaning white. And I had to constantly translate that experience, and not just white, but also heterosexual nuclear families, two parents, all of that. And so I really had to do a lot of translation. And so I want to center people's personal experiences and have them work from those experiences rather than have to translate from another culture.
I love that word, that translate word that you're using, because I think we take for granted how often many of us are translating in the world, where we've been giving these pre-prescribed models, whether they're heteronormativity or white-based or Christian-based, and yet many of us don't fit into those categories, and we don't see the world in the same way as those. And so we're having to translate all these models we've been given. That's a lot of effort for people to do. So I'm really grateful there are people in the world out there that are helping people do that work.
Yeah, most of the stuff I work with or that I adapt was written for biological mothers, for example. And so they talk to moms and they talk as if your child is sharing your DNA. And neither of those is the case for me and my family. And so that was a big impetus for me to figure out how to support people on everyone's unique journey.
Well, we're going to have a lot of time to talk about the work that you're doing in the world, but let's find out more about you as a man. Like, tell me what comes to mind when you think of like your journey as a man, as a boy growing into a man. What has culture taught you? What has the translation process been like? Like, give me some information about like what it's been like growing for you.
Yeah. So I grew up in Hawaii and with primarily Filipino family. My dad's family is from Boston. And so I only saw them infrequently. And so that was my cultural context. And within that context, it was a very kind of stereotypical gender binary. Boys are expected to act in certain ways that are traditionally masculine, maybe a little rambunctious, maybe certain emotions were good and certain emotions were not, right? And I think like many gay to be boys, I didn't fully fit that model, right? And what was great in my family and also in my school, in my elementary school, is that I was 100% supported for my unique self. And I didn't get any negative talk or disparagement for feminine behavior. I think it helped that I was a good student and a good athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a lot of people, they couldn't hold my athleticism and my femininity at the same time. So I obviously wasn't gay in their mind, right? Which seems
those two things can't go together.
Yeah, right. Like my ability to kick a soccer ball somehow like invalidates my femininity. And I think that was really funny looking back. And so I had a really treasured experience where I felt special and supported and didn't actually know I was different. I just thought I was charismatic, right? And then but there are two memories I have where I distinctly remember feeling different. And one was, I think I was in kindergarten and we were playing some sort of like shoot 'em up game, right? And so there were these boys chasing me and they were shooting fake guns at me, and I turned around and I did the Linda Carter Wonder Woman bracelet blocking the bullet. And they like stopped in their tracks, and like if this was a movie, we'd have like the DJ scratch and the long pause, and they looked at me and went, Wonder Woman. And I realized that I had made a faux pas that I didn't know existed, right? That I was not to emulate Wonder Woman in our playground games. And but it wasn't a big deal, right? Like we moved on and that didn't become a thing. And then I had a similar experience when I went to a new school and in 7th grade. Right. And so fast forward, I still don't really have an idea that my behavior might be different than the other boys. And it was maybe first week of school, and I was carrying a bunch of books and I had them situated on my hip because they were heavy. And this guy looked at me and said, "What are you doing? Guys don't carry books like that. Are you one girl?" in Hawaiian Pidgin. And I was like, oh shit, I like broke some boy code rule. But also, how does he know that's a rule? Nobody ever told me that's a rule, right? And I realized that I was in some space, like illegal space that wasn't supposed to be in. And that was really the start of the hard years, right? Where I really wasn't able to fit kind of a traditionally masculine middle school, high school boy role, and felt outcast because of that for a long time. And I remember like studying boy behavior and trying to like emulate that, but it never really worked out for me because like the moment I got excited, I would just like flame out, if you will. and so that was really hard. And so the hard years actually lasted a long time till I think 10th grade, right? Which 7th to 10th grade is a long time in that phase of life. And then I met my own group of friends, really close friends that I'm still close with to this day. and became friends with them and had my own posse where I could really be accepted as me. And that really kind of changed my social life and made things okay for me to move forward and feel. I wasn't dealing with the gay question at all yet, but really like just owning my behaviors and showing up authentically as myself in the world. That was a huge step.
Yeah, some of your story is so relatable, and I don't think it's only for those of us who are gay to be boys. Like, I've heard numerous conversations where there are guys going like, people seem to know that there are certain rules for how you show up as a boy that I wasn't taught. Where was I supposed to learn that? Where was I supposed to know you don't carry books like that?
Right.
I remember junior high, one of the biggest things for people my age was if a guy had his ears pierced, if he had the left one pierced, no, that was the gay thing. You couldn't get a left ear piercing. And I was like, oh, where did people learn that? Like, where did left ear mean gay? Like, what? And like, it was so jarring that people were making such a big deal about who had an earring in one ear or the other or both. I was like, wow, it's so funny. These little cultural things that play out, that we all get these moments of going, oh, whoa, there's a rule here. And I didn't even know there was a rule that I could easily transgress. Luckily, I didn't have any earrings, and so I wasn't transgressing. But I very clearly got that message. Ooh, I'm not getting an earring because I don't want to screw this up.
Yeah. And I imagine that kids nowadays go to the interwebs and like put in a Google search, like, does one earring make you gay? Right. But at the time, there seemed to be these literally unwritten rules, and people knew them, and I learned them late and then couldn't really abide by them.
Yeah. And it's hard when you're trying to find yourself, trying to find authenticity. And so much of our identities at that point are being shaped by what we either get approval for or we get teased for. It's like your ability to kick a soccer ball, you got approval. Oh, there's a great part of my identity. I'm going to lean into that.
Yes.
Versus what I might get rejected for, the way I hold a book, the way I flame out or express myself when I'm excited. Like, we get so much socialization during those time frames that really, I think in some ways it stunts us as men. And I think gay boys can be that way too, because we inherently leave parts of ourselves behind during those hard years. And it's really hard to then later on go back and really decipher what is me and what is the coping strategy I developed to deal in this world.
It's absolutely true that all kids, especially in that middle school, early high school, maybe period of life, are trying out different identities and putting themselves into different boxes, right? And so that might be try to be a masculine straight boy box. That might try to be, a goth emo box or a athlete box, whatever the case may be. And I think I think it's hard for kids of all genders. And I think the penalties for boys are harsher for not fitting into a classically accepted box.
Yeah. Like, usually often female identifying people can often transgress a little bit more. There's tomboys can be celebrated, female like, doesn't mean that there's not their own differences and hardships that are in those moments. But when it comes to our socialization and who we need to be to match our gender that we identify within, it does seem like it's a bit harsher for boys at that stage, at least.
I mean, I think it's interesting that even with all the progress we've made, and we have made a lot of progress, that there's still no equivalent role for tomboy, word for tomboy for boys. Right? Like, we don't have one that's descriptive and not pejorative.
Yeah, it's because we're still using sissy and fag and like girl, and like we're still using like derogatory feminizing language to label boys as a way of hazing them to stay in that man box. It's that, okay, we're going to keep you in check by using this pejorative rather than being able to describe that there are lots of different kinds of people out there,
right?
And there's space for all of us.
One of the the best lines from my mom was, I remember quite young asking her, if a girl who acts like a boy is a tomboy, what do you call a boy who acts like a girl? And she paused and said, sweet. I thought that was like it didn't hit me then, but later in life, I still remembered that moment. And it's such a golden moment that I appreciate from her.
I'm so glad that it came across with such kindness, because there are certain cultures that use sweet as a pejorative, or that there's a little sugar in the tank, a little extra sweetness, and it's a way of not calling someone a gay slur, but it definitely is about singling them out.
Yes. I admit I love the sugar in the tank phrase.
Yeah, it's very funny for sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you were really smart and also athletic, and those were kind of ways that you found validation in the world. Do you think that you developed being smart and your athletic skills because you were getting validation, or do you feel like that was just kind of natural? Like, how much of it felt like a way of overdeveloping something so you could avoid something else about yourself versus just something you naturally were good at and wanted to develop?
Yeah, I think that the academic piece is that I really enjoyed school. And so in elementary school, especially, I was very privileged that I was a scholarship student at a really progressive, loving elementary school where we could really set our own direction and pursue our passion. So, for example, in fourth grade, I wrote every assignment in rhymed poetry.
Whoa.
Yeah, even my science classes, it was poetry, and I was just allowed and encouraged to do that, right? So it's a combination, I think, of interest and validation there. And sports came later in life. I think when I was in earlier elementary school, I kind of enjoyed soccer and baseball, but I wasn't particularly good at it, and I didn't love it compared to other things. And I think my dad especially thought that boys should be doing this. And also there are many benefits from it. Movement, for example, the socialization of being with other kids. And my dad's a really caring guy, and he could see that I didn't hate it, right? And so he kept nudging me along the way. And then somewhere around 11, I became good at everything. And the story I told myself for a long time was that I had worked so hard, and that it was finally paying off. I think puberty was actually probably
testosterone was starting to kick in.
And something happened with my coordination, right? Where all of a sudden I could kick a soccer ball, hit a baseball, catch a frisbee, learn to do a cartwheel to gay it up a little bit. And right, all of these things happened for me. And so then I started to really enjoy sports. And another piece of that enjoyment was I was recognized as a leader. And so I have a very strong memory of, I think, being 12 or 13, and my soccer team sucked that day, and we were just flat. And the coach called out to me and said, Eddie, the team is flat. I need you to pick them up. And so I started trying to motivate the team, but it clicked in me that this was the first time that a grown-up had asked me to do something that they couldn't do themselves. Right. And so it was really investing power in me. And to this day, motivating people and that type of leadership of encouragement, cheerleading, et cetera, was something I consider to be a core skill. And so I really respect and honor Coach Kenny Gleason for identifying that in me and calling that out and nurturing that part. And so I think that played into my love of things too, right? As I was finding identity, I was finding great friends and a sense of belonging, and a sense of purpose altogether.
I love that model that has around power that you just shared, where your coach entrusted you with some power, gave space for you to step into some power.
Mm-hmm.
So many of the conversations of the New Masculine, we're talking about how easy it is in our culture, in US culture, it is for power and masculinity to be almost synonymous, to be like the same thing.
Yeah.
And yet that means that power is only limited to certain kinds of people. And I'm really curious and focused on like, how do we decouple those two things so that people can still have power, but that they're not synonymous. They're not that you have to be masculine in order to have power. And so I love this model that your coach shared in that moment, which is to give space for power, to let you step into
Mm-hmm.
your power, rather than what a lot of men do, which is to hoard power, that there's scarcity around it. And so I need to keep it and not give it to anybody else, or else I lose power. And so that sort of zero-sum game kind of way we hold power.
Absolutely. And there's also, to me, I think a tendency to define masculine power as being very directive, as being unilateral, as, you know, kind of the hard-ass corporate CEO or military general who's barking the orders and making things happen and doesn't question himself, right? And I think I've actually tried out those forms of leadership because I thought that that's what leadership was supposed to look like. Failed miserably at it, right? Like I was leading, but nobody was following. And then, you know, shifted to what are naturally, I think, my strengths around how to bring people along, to create a sense of belonging, to absolutely hold people accountable for bringing their best game, if that's whether that's on a sports team or a work team, right? And nurturing a high sense of accountability. But I think that how I have looked at the power that I want to bring into my leadership has been much more around motivation, consensus building, and an effective team that gets shit done together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that sort of, instead of power over dynamic, it's now the more power with each other, that we share
right.
power, that we motivate each other, that we're highly effective. We're not taking away from the effectiveness of things, but we're just not doing it in a power over dominating sort of way that most of us have been modeled to us in terms of those other kind of masculine leaders that we've seen out there in the world.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
When you and I initially connected, you shared something with me that was sort of another example of this evolution between what you are given validation for and who you actually are, and sort of the evolution that happens over time. I want to read a little thing that you wrote that I just really loved, because I think it points to such an important nuance of a man's journey of finding himself at different stages of his life. And I don't think we talk about these developmental stages enough. So I'm going to read this and then I'd love to hear some more from you on that. So you wrote, for a long time in my career and social life, I led with relationships, with playfulness and with charm. I was also smart and good at what I did, but I think that charm got me a lot of cultural cash, especially as a young gay man. Sass, wit, fabulousness are all associated and expected of gay men, and I could deliver that. I encountered two problems. First, when I wasn't able to charm someone, I faltered. I didn't know what to do. Second, charm is connected with youth. As we age, we can still be funny, but professionally, men are expected to bring leadership, wisdom, experience. It's like I didn't practice to have those things, and now I'm learning on leaning on new muscles and having to develop new skills. When I'm in parenting workshops, I say something that is amusing, but then I drop unexpected knowledge that helps a person see an issue in a different way. I feel like I'm stepping into new strength. It's exhilarating. Tell me about why that is so on your mind, this sort of evolution of you as you continue to move through your life.
Yeah, that was good.
It was good.
Yeah, sure.
I was like, oh, I'm reading this.
I was like, this brother knows something.
I love impressing yourselves.
So I think there are a few types of cultural capital that I have been afforded as my younger self and relied on, right? And so one was feeling cute, right? Like being a young, fit gay guy got me attention and connection socially, right? As well as attraction. And And so I relied on that for a long time. And then also just, I don't want to say playing the part, because I do feel like the sass and wit were authentic to me as well, right? But there was a lot of validation for that.
Mm-hmm.
And what I am noticing is that as I age, the cuteness factor is not rewarded in the same way, right? Like my salt and pepper beard has a lot of salt in it, right? And then the second thing is that the expectation of me, and then maybe the desire to step into a different type of professionalism and to offer different gifts to the world. And so what I didn't realize was that in my playfulness and kind of the charm muscles that I would use in a professional setting, I often let people off the hook for things. And so if there was heat, I would bring the heat down with a joke, right? And what I now am paying attention to is how can I use heat? How can I use tension to accelerate the process that I'm holding? So for example, let's say I'm working with a group of teachers around how they are showing up for their students, right? So I do a lot of coaching and teaching in behavior management and how to use positive tools to help kids behave in more productive ways so that teachers can teach, right? And if a teacher says something that I think is problematic, right, and shows maybe implicit bias or her or his inability to connect with a certain type of kid, if I can just hold and be quiet, or if I can ask the tough question and then be silent and not smile, right, then it really turns the heat up and can bring forward a different kind of conversation where people are having different realizations, right? And so I think that those muscles move towards the concept of gravitas, which is something that is appealing to me. And I don't think I've really achieved it or fully understand that space yet. So I think about what does wisdom look like? What does shared learning at a high level in terms of mind, body, and soul look like in a way that is less playful and maybe silly, right? And I'm still down for the play, but really thinking, right, about how these are tools that I work with.
I might even argue that the reason I wanted to read that was because it's such an example of that. There's a shared learning. You're tracking your own process. You're bringing your own consciousness to it. You're acknowledging where you've been, where you're headed. There's wisdom to it there's an evolution of me as a person. And it's a shared experience when we all get to hear it and read it. Because I really, as you were sharing the story, especially around cutting the tension or taking the tension out of a moment, I really have been playing with that in my own life too, where I developed some coping strategies that had some humor involved in them that were about how do I bring down the temperature in a situation. In some ways, I adopted some, I don't know if it was consciously, but I started developing some strategies that were about it's my job to relieve the tension in moments. It's my job to bring the temperature down. And I started that became part of my identity at some points. And then it's where does that get in the way of my own coaching work? Where does that get in the way of my relationships where I'm constantly taking the temperature down instead of allowing the heat to do what it wants to do, which is to help transform?
Yeah. So if I could throw a question back at you.
Yeah.
In your coaching work, how do you think about heat and holding space to create room for transformation with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think I learned the most about it because I do a version of coaching that involves horses. And so in that dialogue with horses, I can't pull a joke. I can't be funny. I can't take the temperature down with a being that doesn't speak the same language as I do. And so I take people out and do experiential learning with horses. And so there are moments where you sit in a moment of pressure, because horses' language is often much more about pressure and release of pressure in their physical body movements. And so I learned how to embody that a little bit before I learned how to personality-wise embody that. But I think, as I was saying, like, I think that heat is there to help transform something. And if somebody has hired me to be a support person and to walk alongside of them in their journey, I don't want to shy away from the heat, because of shying away from the heat helps them stay in the same pattern. Nothing changes, nothing evolves, nothing grows and expands. And so I have learned in the role of coach to do that. And I think it's still something I'm working on as a person in my personal relationships, is to not go unconscious into that part of me that wants to cut the tension, that wants to lower the temperature really quickly in any sort of potential conflict kind of situation. So it's interesting that I can see it in parts of my identity, and I'm still learning how to spread it wider through the all of me kind of thing.
That's great.
I can see where mine started to develop. I was not the funny one. My brother was definitely the clown in our family. And when he went to college and there was a gap in the family dynamic, it was like, oh, someone's got to be funny. Someone's got to pick this up. Like, and so I started learning how to develop it at that time. And then I was starting to address my own sexuality and learning how to be the witty gay man to get some cultural cash. Like, I was learning those things too. And I can see where they were ways of me helping, like, learning how to cope with what I was feeling. And as I'm now on a different part of my journey, I get to really reflect on, like, ooh, that humor's there for a reason and I want to keep it. But I also really want to be more comfortable sitting in the heat because it has a purpose.
One thing that I'm really glad you brought up your sibling dynamic there, because so I have two sons. I have a 12-year-old and a 6-year-old, and they're both really funny. And but my 6-year-old especially has this really sincere, cute, creative, sometimes sophisticated wit. And we went through some really hard shit during the pandemic. I saw him start to take on the role of the clown in the dysfunctional family. And it was great because he was able to alleviate some of the pressure and release that you talked about. He was able to create some of that release. But I also wanted to, like, just reach out and hold him and say, you don't have to do this role. It's not, I'm not putting that on you. It's not something that you have to carry. And me laughing at your jokes and antics doesn't mean that you have to take on this pressure for your life. Right? You can't say that to a then 4-year-old, right? And in a way that makes sense. And so, but it's something that I've been conscious about, and still hope for his development, that we can say, be as hilarious as you want, but you don't have to hold this role for us.
Yeah, I think that's that. In the intro, I was talking about sort of the inner work that it's required to continue to show up well in that role, is to be able to allow your kid to develop a sense of humor, but also to not force that child into a role for the family. And it's pretty ingenious how well kids learn how to like slot themselves into a role without even their, like, prefrontal cortex fully on board with their there's a brilliance to this way that kids learn how to cope and how to navigate hard things and to slot into a role. And when we step into parenthood, I think that's the kind of the gift of gay men or gay queer people that are parenting, is they've had to do so much work to get to be parents. There's no accidental pregnancy. There's more intentionality available to many of us. And so when we can be more thoughtful and intentional about how we do want to show up, what roles we do want our kids to be able to step into and also step out of when they're in their own moment of something, I love that there's like sort of a consciousness to your parenting to be able to see your kid both developing a strength and also the possibility that it could slip into something that might feel like pressure to him.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So tell me more about, I mean, now you're a parent of 2 kids. You are, it's a house full of men. Tell me more
call
about
ourselves the House of 8 Balls.
the House of 8 Balls. Okay. So tell me more about like what parenting has taught you, what parenting boys has taught you. Like, tell me more about this part of your journey.
Okay. So this is a framework that I've only recently developed and come to understand, but it's something that happened to me throughout my parenting journey. And what I realize is, we all have both wisdom and wounds from our families of origin, right? And depending on your individual and cultural context, you may have a greater percentage of wounds or not, right? And so I think I had a lot of wisdom and some pretty significant wounds that I inherited from my family. In particular, my grandparents immigrated from the Philippines to Hawaii in 1918. And life was really hard, right? And so my grandmother was a child bride. I'm not sure how much agency she had in her marriage choice, if any. She had 10 children. The last 3 almost physically killed her. The sugarcane plantation doctor brought my grandfather in for an involuntary vasectomy after the last baby, which was my mother. Mm-hmm. And there was also lots of violence in the community, right? My grandfather participated in strikes, and it was common for the strikes to be broken up by goons, like physically broken up. My grandmother would tell a story of how on payday, the men would take the women into the sugarcane fields and stand guard with their cane knives because they were worried about the bachelor men from a different camp getting drunk off their pay money and then coming into town to cowboy the women. And I was an adult when I finally realized what cowboy meant, right? So there's all of this intensity and violence, as well as, love and care and community and loyalty and all of these things, right? And so, but that violence and intensity trickled into the way that they brought their kids up and into my parents and aunties and uncles' definitions of how you raised kids, right? And so we were not to talk back. We were to appreciate that life was hard and we had it better than our parents would. It was a very strict upbringing in many ways, in addition to lots of care and lots of support, right? And so this is what I mean with the wisdom and the wounds. I think many of us, including me, grow up and move into our early adulthood, if you will, like our 20s, early 30s, and we become aware of some of the baggage that we carry, right? So we understand that we have these wounds, but also we figure out how to navigate the world in an okay way, right? And so we have careers, we have relationships, we have friends. And so a lot of the time we take this damage and we put it in a box and we label the box fear of conflict, and we put it on a shelf, or difficulty with attachment, and we label that and put it in a box. And then we just kind of move through life okay. When you have kids, they find that shelf and they take the boxes down and they rip them open and say, look, Daddy, here's your fear of attachment. What are you going to do about it now? Mm-hmm. And so they will find and help us rediscover these wounds as well as the wisdom and give us the opportunity to heal, right? And then the work of conscious parenting is not just tools to engage with your kids in a deeper way. It's looking at what those wounds are and having a chance to go deep and really heal them so that we can show up for our kids better. And so the things that trigger us, right? So I will say one of my big triggers is when my older son is aggressive towards my younger son. And that confused me for a while because I was the older brother and I know how annoying little brothers are, right? And so why am I so triggered? And then it was through a process of understanding how triggers work and realizing that we're often triggered by the things that we had to suppress in ourselves, like the things that were punished or threatened out of us. And remembering that I had some really aggressive tendencies towards my little brother. Like I would lose my shit and have extreme temper tantrums and become sometimes physically violent with him and was punished for those things. And so when I see my older son exhibit similar behaviors, I'm mad at him and myself at the same time.
Right.
Right. And so now I get to do that work of going deep and understanding and healing those wounds. And that is a whole process to be able to do, and something that I now guide parents through. And so I think you probably find this in your coaching as well, right? That the work I do with others around their healing and journeys helps me to keep going further in my own.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Being along the journey with other people, feeling the human element of what we're all struggling in these different areas and navigating and making progress on things. It's definitely fuel to continue expanding and growing. Something that comes up as you're sharing this is there's a lot of thoughtfulness, and I'm sure there's been plenty of messy moments. And so this has been a knowledge that's been and wisdom that's been unwrapped over time. But what have been the key elements to help you bring more of that consciousness to your own parenting? Because I don't know that a lot of men are doing the work once the trigger happens. Like so many of us, once we're triggered, we just go on into our habitual ways of showing up, which can often cause more harm, can be damaging, can create more disconnection, can rewound the situation. And yet you're talking about this sort of like consciousness that's about stepping out, looking at the pattern, tracking back where that's coming from you, looking at what you want to do differently in the moment. Like, what's been the most important things that have given you that ability?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one, the men that I have the privilege of working with are already at a significant advantage because they're showing up for the workshops and the coaching that I'm doing, right?
Yeah,
and so
they're already there.
Yes, they're already there. It's interesting. Usually their wives drag them into it.
Yeah.
Right. And so usually my initial clients are women, and in a heterosexual relationship, parenting relationship, then these moms pull in the dads into the relationship, into the sessions. The dads don't come kicking and screaming, right? They come in with some openness, but then find meaning and even potentially joy and the ability to do transformative work, right? And so I want to acknowledge that they're at an advantage because they're showing up. What I work with is a model where they know what the trigger is, right? And usually are in some level of struggle with, I want to let that trigger go, but also I feel like I'm right. Right?
Yeah, so
exactly. My kid talks back to me and I scream at them. And I know I shouldn't scream at my kid, but also I don't think my kid should be talking back to me. Right. And so we work through that, and I'll give them some tools and resources to do things a little better. Right. So that they do see progress before I ask them to do the deep work. And then we have critical, deep conversations about where they think that trigger is based in their childhood memories, or even in, I want to say ancestrally, and I don't mean something really funky with that. I mean, like, how were these traditions passed down, the toxic sides of our traditions, right? And so it can take us a couple sessions to make those connections. And often the first one is not the right one, we realize, right? Yeah. Once we have that, then what I ask for is first that and anyone who's going to do this healing work has to make space for the work. And making space means that we're going to push away some of the activities that we use to numb ourselves, right? Because numbing is not healing. Right? And I am pro numbing, don't get me wrong. But if you do the healing work, it's time to cut back somewhere on alcohol, edibles, TikTok, Netflix binging, right?
Video games.
Yeah, all the things, right? That many of which I look forward to. And but they take us away from doing the deep introspective work, right? And then to come up with a plan to do that deep work. And I really want people to tap into what they know or are interested in or is culturally congruent to their own histories, right? And so like, if you have been interested, if you're in therapy, great, let's keep doing that. If you are working with me and we can like dig into deeper practices around your family and memories and figure out what that's about, we can do that. If one is interested in doing or has some sort of indigenous practice that's part of their history or even in others, right? It's a great time to do that. If you've been interested in like the ayahuasca journey or psilocybin, now's a great time for that type of thing. And so I'm rather agnostic about how you do that. And then, you know what, I'm going to the more intense stuff, journaling, talking with your bestie.
Ayahuasca is a bit out there in the far reaches, but journaling might be a little bit more accessible.
Going for long walks without your phone. And thinking about this thing. If you have a meditative practice, right, bringing that memory or that desire front and center in your meditative practice, right? So we come up with these different ways. By the way, I don't do any guided ayahuasca.
So people shouldn't come to you for their psychedelic trips.
Looking forward to that. You find somebody else. And you know how it goes.
It's good so people know exactly what kind of services you're offering and not offering.
And then through that process, what I've noticed is whatever the process is, people will come to a place where they need to offer forgiveness. And that forgiveness is usually to your children, to your parents, maybe to your spouse. And then the hardest one, of course, is to the self. Right. And that forgiveness process really opens up the possibility of behavior change. Right. And then we can access all the tools. Right. And then there's, 12 different parenting tools I can give you for this situation that you can now access because you're aware of your trigger and you're healing that wound. And so you're less likely to have an amygdala-driven response when your kid is slow to get out the door in the morning, right? And so then we can do a lot of the more practical things. And then once we go through that cycle, you'll have another epiphany about something that you need to heal, and we can do another cycle together if you want, although I would encourage you to have some wine and Netflix before. Give yourself a break, and then we can do another cycle.
Pace it. There's a pacing to this healing work.
Yes, there's great TV out there to binge.
There sure is. There sure is. I love that you highlighted that self-forgiveness piece. I noticed that even in myself as a man, that can be one of the hardest places, is like, I expect a lot of myself. I work really hard at being a solid man in this world. I work really hard with my clients. And when I screw it up, when I mess up, when I get triggered, it can be really easy to just kind of really be hard on myself and really try to use that as a motivator for change. And maybe temporarily it keeps me from doing responding to a trigger in some way, but it's not really a way to heal. It's just about like skipping over that a little bit and actually not working on the actual reason the trigger is there. It's sort of the Band-Aid versus the actual treatment of what is that leads to healing. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Also, it's not, self-forgiveness is not important part of the male story
Mm.
that we tell, right? We don't see a lot of narrative storytelling myth around men's self-forgiveness, right? I would say one notable one is what's that movie with Robin Williams, Ben Affleck, Matt Damon?
Is it Good Will Hunting?
Yes, Good Will Hunting. So the scene where Robin Williams, like, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault until he just breaks and bawls, right? And it's so, I cry every time. And it's so like amazingly like crack open cathartic, right? Because he gets to the point where there is healing and self-forgiveness through that process. And I'd love to see more stories.
Yeah, hell yeah. Like, I'm so glad you're bringing this up. I want to see more of those stories.
Yeah.
I want to see other men modeling what self-forgiveness looks like, breaking through that intensity, that trigger, that numbing that keeps it stuck in place, but making a step over it and seeing what that process is of self-forgiveness.
Because the narratives we have are really about soldiering on through or with your pain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
It's a badge of honor for men to soldier through. Yeah.
And I was doing this amazing workshop, and this is beyond American culture, right? That so in my Filipino dialect, which is not the main one, it's Bisaya, or from the Visayan Isles. There's this word antos, which was very much a value in my family, and it means something like endure, bite the bullet, tough it out. It definitely meant don't complain about your life, because shit's hard, and it was harder for us, right? And I was sharing this in a workshop with Asian Pacific Islander parents, and a Chinese woman said that in her dialect, the word translates to eat bitterness.
Oh,
right. And everyone had that right.
Truth telling right there.
Yes. And so, I think that is a value that has its place in some ways. And if it blocks our forgiveness and therefore our healing and ability to be better as humans in the world, then it becomes a problematic or toxic value.
Yeah, I guess as I'm trying to relate it to my own culture of like sort of being a white person in the US, maybe the similar thing would be the pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of thing, where it's very individual, it's effort based, it's you have to work at it, you have to you got to put all that trauma behind you, you got to put all that stuff. It doesn't matter that we just all went through a global pandemic and had to shut down everything and just went through this big traumatic thing as a culture. Just keep going, get back to work, keep going. Like, where there is some, I understand why that messaging is there, there is some motivating and hopeful element to that, but it also, there's a point where it no longer fits and is actually quite in shadow for a lot of people, where it's a driving thing that doesn't allow us to be human beings. It makes us continue to be human doers out there in the world.
Yeah, I think an important note on this is, so I've been on Zoloft for 2 years now, right? And I am one of the most pro mental health people in all areas. And I felt so much shame and more than shame, just weakness when I started it.
Yeah.
Right. Like that I was not good enough, strong enough to do this without medical help. And it's ridiculous because when I get a sports injury, I do all the things I'm supposed to do. I ice, I heat, I elevate, I do my rehab. But something about the similar process with my own anxiety at the time just felt so weak and like a failure to me.
Yeah, I think that it's so relatable. I think so many of us as men, whether it's therapy, whether it's hiring a coach, whether it's getting a parenting educator, whether it's going on any kind of support medication for your mental health, it automatically, we have so much to traverse in order to get over that storyline that's implanted in so many of us of weakness. And we've spent our whole lives as men trying not to look weak because our value is in the strength and in our abilities rather than in our weakness. And so there's such a hurdle there that most of us have to jump over, that we internalize that weakness story, and then we have to confront it anytime we ask for help, that we get some support for something, that we look like we can't manage it all. Like I so appreciate you sharing that even as a coach, as a parenting educator, as somebody that has a lot of skill sets, you still need support as a man too. And that you've had to also bump into that story within yourself as well.
I think it's even gotten more complicated in some way, because in the post Brene Brown world, where vulnerability is being raised up as a celebrated aspect of all of our lives, I have found myself falling into the trap of, how do I show just enough vulnerability to seem even stronger because I'm vulnerable? Right? And wanting to use that as another tool to seem more powerful, if you will, versus like just authentically vulnerable, right?
Yeah, where vulnerability becomes another tool in the toolbox rather than actually a genuine expression of what you're feeling and going through. Yeah.
Yes.
I know that important.
Just telling your audience that I'm on Zoloft felt authentically vulnerable. So
I feel that. And I appreciate you doing so.
Yeah.
I know an important part of your family makeup, and I know there's a lot of families out there that are like that. And I think there's an important makeup of your family is the fact that you are two men of color and you have two white children.
Yeah.
Tell me about, like, you're talking a lot about sort of your own cultural, generational stuff that comes from your background. Tell me what it's like being a mixed race family, living in this current climate and culture. Tell me about it.
Yeah. So we kind of flipped the script on Asian adoption, right? So there's two Filipino men who have two white sons. It was interesting because when we went, so we adopted through foster adopt, and it's kind of like you get what you get and you prepare for it. And so we were ready to do a cultural support for an African-American child, a Latino child, an Asian Pacific Islander child that was not Filipino, right? And so like we were going to lean into the cultural support. And then we ended up getting a Caucasian son. And then 6 years later, we got a call that his biological brother was born and in the hospital, and are we ready to take him home? So we did have an unplanned gay pregnancy, by the way.
Oh, so you're right. It is possible. I should have known that. I used to be a child protective services investigator. I should have known this. Yeah, there are unplanned pregnancies.
And so we got the call, and 4 days later, we had a new baby.
Wow.
And so that was amazing. And so, but it was funny, it's still funny to me because we were at a loss, like, how do we support Caucasian children? What does that mean? Like, what do, are there cultural events that we go to, right? Like, how does that all work out? And so I would say that what we've mostly done is make sure that our sons have a very strong, very diverse community to support them. And so I think one thing that queer folks understand maybe better than heterosexual parents is the ability to call in community in big ways to support your children and your family. Right. And especially that there are a lot of, in our case, lesbian and gay and straight aunties, chosen aunties and uncles, aunties and guncles, who have chosen not to have their own kids and have spare love, time, and even financial resources that they want to put somewhere, right? And so we've been very blessed to have folks of all races, different sexualities, be very involved in our kids, to just give different types of support and be role models for our kids. we
so
don't
glad to hear that.
we don't script what that looks like, right? But it does look like I don't want to see the new Little Mermaid movie. So let's call in somebody who does.
There's an auntie or an uncle that does.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But it also means taking my kids on weekend trips, on sending them away to their godfather's house for the summer, for like a week. It means all kinds of different adventures. And I think especially as my older son moves into the tween and teen years, having different adults that he can talk to, rely on for different types of support if he doesn't want to talk to his dads about those things.
Kind of it's making more sense to me now why your business is called Village Well. This is so village oriented parenting. It's so like communal raising of children, which is where many cultures used to be. And I would imagine this is really important work for your family, because I would imagine your goal is to have them have healthy identities in who they are, but also to be aware of the world. And right now there's a lot of conversations, especially in the US, around white privilege, around systemic racism, about the things that people of color are disenfranchised from or navigating that are just systemic, that are not necessarily overt racism. And so it's like, how do you raise boys that are not ashamed of themselves, but then also able to be present to the realities of people who look and experience the world differently than they do?
I think that is really important and definitely not unique to my family. Right. That there are a lot of folks with white children who want to raise them in a way that they understand systemic racism, how privilege works, but also want them to give themselves a healthy and positive identity. And how do you do that? Right. Yeah. I think it's a struggle. Yeah. And one of the things that we just look at is, how do you be a good person? Right. And so our family values are work hard, be nice, and show respect for grownups, and kindness for kids and animals. And that's basically what we hold as what it means to be a good, productive human being. And those are things that we can teach at different age levels, right?
I'm glad to hear and have your sort of voice on here, because there are conversations in our broader culture that are about, you can't teach some of the some of the history of the United States because of what it teaches children to feel bad about themselves. And there's sort of this, well, you can't do this because it makes this happen. It's like, well, there can be more nuance, and there can be more context, and there can be both the support for understanding that others have different experiences than we do, and supporting a healthy identity within ourselves, and recognizing that we can both love ourselves and love others and be present for others' experiences at the same time. It's not one or the other, that you're offering that it can be both.
Right. And that the world and America have a very tricky, complicated, and difficult past that also informs our present. And being aware of those things helps us to be better humans. Doesn't mean that we have to take responsibility for those things, but it means that we take responsibility for continuing the work to undo those things.
Yeah, beautiful. If you were going to leave the guys that are listening to this podcast, or the people, I have a very mixed audience. And so I hear you all out there, with the women in my life and the queer people in our lives. Yeah. So if you were going to leave with any piece of advice for them as we sort of wrap up our conversation, what comes to mind?
I'm going to give two.
Oh, love it.
So one is, I was just talking about community. And so call in your queers. If you are a parent and you want to raise your kids in community, that you have LGBTQIA friends out there who are, and as well as straight friends who are choosing not to be choosing to be child free, invite them in and ask them how they can play big roles in your kids' lives, right?
Yeah.
Because many people that are looking for that experience.
Yeah, queer people know the whole chosen family thing better than a lot of communities do. Most of us have to find chosen communities, and and chosen families, and so we can be a part of that process for the kids too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then my second piece of advice. So I'm 51 now, and I've been an athlete my whole life. And my second piece of advice is, as you age, pick up pickleball. I am the latest victim of the pickleball craze. It is a sport that you can age with. It is easy to get decent at, but hard to become good at. And you can figure out how to play it well with many different types of mobility. And so I'm hooked on it. I'm playing 3 times a week. I don't think that's enough. And so I just encourage people to try it out.
Love it. You're speaking that's the official sport of the state of Washington. It was created in Washington. And so you're talking our game up here. You see, also, it's not a lot of sun, but people are out there still playing pickleball.
And also to your tennis playing listeners, I'm sorry. I know you hate us. It's okay. We will learn to get along.
We're taking your courts up. We know. This fad is taking over your courts. Got it.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I so appreciate you coming on and sharing not only about the work that you're doing, but about you and your family. I think hearing your story, hearing what you're learning, listening to you being conscious of yourself and what you bring into your parenting and how your kids are so great at pulling those boxes off the shelf and shoving them in your face to say, here, you get to work on this now. Yeah. I think it's just really inspiring to hear that from a man who's being really conscious and really being thoughtful about the way he wants to show up with his children. So thanks for being willing to not only share about your work as a professional, but to share the human that you are as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I love this work that you're doing.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your taking on this issue in so many different ways and opening up what it means to be masculine, male, a man. I think it's an important cultural conversation for us to be having.
Absolutely. It totally is. If people wanted to find more about you and the work that you're doing in the world, how do they find you out there?
Yeah, my website is villagewellparenting.com, and you can sign up for our biweekly newsletter, Morning Cup of Calm. And I think there's interesting content on it because I write it. And also, it's the best way to learn about workshops, activities that you can get involved in. And you can also find me on Instagram at villagewellparenting and TikTok at Queer Brown Dad.
Okay, yeah, I'm glad you threw out those because that's where people are finding all their information these days, TikTok or Instagram. So I'm glad you brought those out there too. I couldn't recommend your work anymore to people. I was recently talking to a group of coaches who are considering what their niche is, and they were talking about, some of them are inspired around parenting, especially with men. And they were like, how do we do this with men? And who's doing this work already? So I just love that right after having that conversation, you and I were connected, and it's like, oh, I can point people in your direction and say, here, there are people doing this work out there in the world. So thanks for joining me, and thanks for sharing so much about yourself and the work that you're doing in the world.
That was a lot of fun.
If people want to get in connection with me, you can go to my website at travisstock.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Travers03. That's where a lot of the ongoing conversations for this podcast are going on once you've listened to the episode. So please follow me there. And if you're liking the mission of this podcast and want to become a supporter, you can go to patreon.com/thenewmasculine to become a contributor. Thanks again so much, Ed, for sharing yourself and your work with Village Well. Until our next episode.